Hey, if you're a fan of Sammy Hagar, Neal Schon, or even this supergroup here, H.S.A.S, I think you're going to enjoy what I have for you here today. You know, a couple days ago, we were making a video, and it was I mentioned B.J. Wilson, because B.J. Wilson was actually Jimmy Page's first choice to be the drummer for Led Zeppelin. But B.J. Wilson couldn't do it because he was a member of the band Procol Harum. And Procol Harum, one of their really big hits was, of course, Whiter Shade of Pale. So I'd been kind of thinking about that and kind of going through my mind, and I was reading a few articles, and I thought, Whiter Shade of Pale. And I remembered that H.S.A.S, this group, Hagar, Schon, Aaronson Shrieve, they had actually done a cover of Whiter Shade of Pale. And actually, for me, that was the first time I ever heard it. And this group right here was H.S.A.S, was what we kind of knew it as. It was this supergroup, and we started hearing sometime in '83 that Sammy Hagar and Neal Schon were putting an album out together, and there was this buzz around, and there was this supergroup that was forming, and then we were all excited, me and my friends, about this album that was going to come out, because we were all Sammy Hagar fans, of course. And then I was a big Journey fan, as a lot of people were, and Neal Schon, you know, every guitar players, everybody really kind of respected him. And so we just got excited about this album that was going to come out. And what had happened is in November of 1983, these guys, Hagar, Schon, Aaronson, and Shrieve, which is Sammy Hagar, Neal Schon, Kenny Aaronson, and Michael Shrieve, had basically played a bunch of shows together and recorded these things. And then this happened in November of '83. And then in December, the next month, they took some of these recordings into a studio and kind of cleaned them up, added some guitar parts, and then released it as this album. And then it came out in March of 1984. This album was released. And this is the one I bought. I went out immediately and bought it because I was so excited. We have this supergroup. And the interesting thing about supergroups is there's a couple of things. One of them, they either just don't work or they don't last. Now every once in a while that's not true, but it happens a lot of times where it's a little bit like having a sports team that has too many stars. You need to have a person that kind of runs the thing that's the main. That's usually the way these things happen, is you get too many cooks. You know the old idea. You have too many egos, top shelf artists, and then you put them all in the same room. And theoretically, you think you're going to have something just absolutely amazing, but a lot of times it just doesn't work out that way. Now, there's a lot of people that loved this album. I thought it was okay. There's a couple things on here. It had some redeeming qualities that I thought were pretty good. I didn't love it. But I don't think the reason this didn't last was because there was egos. I think it was just you had people that were too busy with their other projects. Because when this came out, Neal Schon was in one of the biggest bands in the world, Journey. This came out after Frontiers was out. And of course, Frontiers, Escape had put them on the map in a huge, huge way. I mean, they were already popular, but Escape turned them into superstars. And then Frontier comes out, and it has these hit songs like Separate Ways and Faithfully, and they're just giant. And Sammy Hagar is well into his solo career at this point. He's on 3 Lock Box here, which is pretty big. And anyway, he's getting ready to go into the studio and record VOA pretty soon. And so you just had too many other big things going on, and I don't think the powers that be were ever really going to let this thing turn into anything, because it was just these other people had these huge things happening, and just the record companies just probably were not super excited, if I had to guess, about this even in the first place. Now that's Sammy Hagar and Neal Schon. Kenny Aaronson and Michael Shrieve were famous in their own right, but they weren't quite the same. I'm going to flip this over and just show you a couple things that one or two things you might find interesting. Of course, there's Neal Schon, Sammy Hagar. This is Michael Shrieve. That's Kenny Aaronson. Now, Kenny Aaronson, I remember when I saw this, I thought, wait, where have I seen that guy before? Now, where you would have seen him before is he played with Billy Squier. And if you watch any of those old videos off of the Don't Say No album from Billy Squier, he's in those videos. There's live concert footage you can find. You're going to see him. And he's got that look. You know, he's got the short hair, the sunglasses. You can always recognize him. So go back and look at those videos, and that's where you're going to find Kenny Aaronson. Now, the other thing that's pretty interesting is Michael Shrieve. Who was this guy? And how did he end up here? Well, how he ended up here is pretty interesting because, as you probably know, Neal Schon started his career playing with Santana. Now, I'm going to show you something kind of interesting. This right here is Santana's third album. It's untitled, but a lot of people, kind of like Led Zeppelin 4 is untitled, people just kind of refer to this as Santana 3. But similarly, it's untitled, and similarly, there's no writing anywhere on it, kind of like Led Zeppelin 4. But I'm going to open this up and show you something. So on the inside here, there, of course, is Greg Raleigh, who he and Neal Schon formed Journey together. So there's Greg Raleigh, there's Neal Schon, and there's Michael Shrieve. And so these two, Neal Schon and Michael Shrieve, had actually played together in Santana. As a matter of fact, there they are on the inside of this album. And so that's how you end up with Michael Shrieve in this band, because he had a really a working relationship already with Neal Schon. So when they were putting this group together, he was just an obvious selection to be a part of this thing. Now, when they put this album out, as I said a minute ago, they did a version of, right there, you can see it, Whiter Shade of Pale. And Whiter Shade of Pale had been a hit back in the 60s, again, from Procol Harum. And it was, the version of it here is pretty interesting because it's interesting because listening to Sammy Hagar is just always a pleasure. He's got such an amazing voice. And I think it was, I won't get this right, but in Ted Templeman's book, he talks about Sammy Hagar like you could wake him up out of a dead sleep and he'd be able to sing perfectly instantly. He just is so good. And so his version singing Whiter Shade of Pale it's pretty cool. And so I had never heard the song before this album came out. And so then I'm listening to it, and then I kind of find out that, oh, this is an old Who? What's that band? What are they called? And anyway, because it was way before my time. And also, how old am I at this point when I buy this? 14? You know, I would have been 14 years old when this came out. And so anyway, that was kind of interesting just in that way. But the song that really got me, and I think this was true for a lot of people, was just the first song. It was called Top of the Rock. And it just started out with this really aggressive, amazing, almost anthemic guitar part from Neal Schon. You know, da-na-na, da-na-na. It's awesome. And, you know, a lot of us knew that Neal Schon had it in him. And, you know, Journey had been so much of a kind of a pop group, kind of a, you know, almost a jazz fusion group at first. And then Steve Perry joins, and then little by little they turn into kind of a pop group. And then by the time Raised on Radio is out, they're unrecognizable. And it's funny watching Neal Schon because we knew that he had this in him. Because if you go back to songs, for example, on Frontiers, and it was almost like the last gasp of Neal Schon trying to be a rocker, where it was the song Edge of the Blade. And it was kind of a, you know, it was a pretty rockin' tune. And if you go back into some of those, you know, Escape and Frontiers, there are a couple of tunes there, but that one in particular, just I remember, just had kind of an edge to it. By the time you get to Raised on Radio, I mean, the song Raised on Radio kind of was a little bit rockin', but I mean, they had turned into just pop music. There was very, very little edge to it anymore. And so it's almost a little bit like Neal Schon needed this to go out and to do something to get back to some of that cool energy that he seemed to like to do periodically in Journey. So anyway, but the album, then they had one other song called Missing You, which was, I don't know, a lot of people really liked that. And for me, it was almost just a little bit, too much. Like, okay, let's write our hit song now, and it sounds like that should be a hit. And it's, to me, just a little bit forced. It sounds, hey, that sounds like a hit song, and it does sound like a hit song, and it's, in my opinion, because of it, kind of a little bit, I don't know, boring. The production on this album is actually phenomenal. It's amazing. And the last three songs, Animation is a pretty cool song simply because it feels a little bit experimental. They do a lot of interesting things in there. And again, the production's fantastic. And Giza is kind of a cool little thing too. Well, anyway, what I'm going to share with you today is one of the things we do here a lot on this channel is we read old record reviews. And I've got 3 of them, and they're very short. But if you're familiar with this band and this album and these guys and these songs, I think you'll enjoy listening to this. And what I hope you'll do is as you listen, how do you relate to this? Because a lot of people, again, loved this album. I enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. I actually loved I liked the idea of it more than I liked it. But like I said, Top of the Rock, that song, I'll still pull that out. I mean, it's good enough to just go out of your way to listen to it. It's that powerful of a tune, in my opinion. So I'm going to read these things to you. They're, like I said, they're pretty short. But as you hear this, think about how do you relate to what these people have to say. These were all written in 1984, and it's at the time. This is brand new, and this is how people were reacting to it. So anyway, so here we go. So the first one here is from the Indianapolis Star. This is May 6th of 1984. And the title of this one is Hagar Schon Combo Offers Dull Album. Okay. Last fall, macho rocker Sammy Hagar, Journey guitarist Neal Schon, and a couple of other veteran musicians did a series of benefit concerts in California. Proceeds from the sale of concert items at the shows went to the Sports and Arts Department of community schools. Geffen Records has now released a live album of 9 of the songs performed by the improvised group, titled Through the Fire. The album is a mixed bag with some surprising results, both good and bad. Schon and Hagar first got the idea for some kind of collaboration after playing together at a date in San Francisco in 1977. After that, busy schedules interfered with their efforts, but late last year, Schon and Hagar got together with drummer Michael Shrieve, formerly of Santana, and bass player Kenny Aaronson, who was going to tour with Foghat, and decided to try the benefit concerts. Ironically, Hagar was assigned to handle only vocals, with the other 3 forming a power trio. Little more than a month was spent preparing and rehearsing 15 songs for the concerts, and in November, the live album of 9 of them was recorded. Through the Fire demonstrates just how far live recording technology has come. By the way, that's really true. Because as I said a second ago, the production on this thing is so good. It's just so interesting listening to it. The sound quality is great. Neal Schon's guitar sounds great, although they probably did a bunch of the guitars in the studio. Sammy's vocals are amazing. Anyway, if live recordings were really the foundation of this record, it actually is pretty amazing, especially for the time. Let's see here. Not knowing any better, a first-time listener would think the record was produced in studio recording sessions. Several of the songs are notable, especially when the short time in which they were written is considered. Both Top of the Rock and Missing You, which open side 1, are good songs. Top of the Rock, a song in which Hagar thumbs his nose at establishment types, is getting radio airplay. And I actually remember that too. The Top of the Rock, I think, as I recall, we heard the song before the album got released. I think they put it out ahead of time because I remember hearing it on the radio and thinking, whoa, this is going to be epic. This is so cool. Let's see here. Is getting radio play. Missing You, though, is probably a better song with a catchy chorus, easy to repeat from memory. But the rest of the first side and the middle of side 2 are plagued by a common malady of power trios, monotony. The songs just start sounding alike. If you are not paying attention, a listener would think that the last 3 numbers, Animation, Valley of the Kings, and Giva, are all one song. The middle of side 2 containing Hot and Dirty and He Will Understand also sound alike. Hot and Dirty is probably the poorest song of the album, with terribly repetitive and simplistic lyrics. Yeah, okay, so for me, in a lot of this stuff, when I was this age, and I bought this, again, 14, 15 years old in that area, I had a summer job. I was making a little bit of money, and I was actually working as a DJ where I would go do dances because I had this growing record collection. And so I was buying so many records. It's hard, it's almost embarrassing how many records I was buying just all the time. Like I had money just burning holes in my pocket, and I was just buying records like this. And what happened to me after a while is I was buying several. Anyway, I would bring these things home and I'd put the needle on, and if it didn't catch my attention within 10, 15 seconds, next song, I have probably 100 albums, maybe several hundred albums in my record collection. That's all the attention ever got, because I was buying so many. If it didn't catch my attention, I would just be like, and I just put it on the shelf, and then that would be the end of it. This was one of those where I just kept, go to the next song. And I think I gave it a bunch of tries, and I listened to it all the way through probably 3 or 4 times, but I just didn't love it. I was buying so much other stuff that this one is not one of them that was like, yes, I love this so much. It was okay. And it had, and Top of the Rock was good enough that I kept going back to that song. But the rest of the album was like, meh for me. Okay. So what he says, he says it's probably the poorest song of the album with terribly repetitive and simplistic lyrics. Yeah. And this album, it kind of, in my opinion, had a lot of that kind of stuff where it's like, just wasn't. Again, when you have all these superstars together, you have a certain expectation, and you see enough of these supergroups kind of come and go that you realize it's usually not going to happen. I mean, there's a few of them, like Bad Company, for example. There's a supergroup, and they just kept putting out great music after great music. But a lot of these just come in, maybe have a song or two that are okay, they fizzle out, whatever, and this was kind of one of those. But other songs on Through the Fire make it worth listening. A cover version of Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale stands out, and My Hometown closes the album with a flourish. Hagar, Schon, Aaronson, and Shrieve were pleased enough with their efforts that they intend to get back together for a more extensive tour, or perhaps a studio album with more polish. They can only get better. So again, they intended to get together, but as we know, that never, well, not in this form, that never ended up happening. Okay, here's the next one. This is from the Times, Sunday, March 25th, 1984. So this one's actually, this would be, probably a week or two after it comes out. So Hagar, Schon, Aaronson, Shrieve, Through the Fire. Listeners expect a lot when 4 or 5 top-notch players with noted bands get together for a musical free-for-all. When those 4 are power vocalist Sammy Hagar, former Santana drummer Michael Shrieve, Journey guitarist Neal Schon, and Billy Squier bassist Kenny Aaronson, magic could well be expected. But the 4 don't come across as overpowering in their first recording together, Through the Fire. Most of the 9 songs are powerful and well put together, but one would still expect magic, as when Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young left bands like the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, and the Hollies to spread their wings. There's an example of a supergroup that worked. I mean, they really had something spectacular when they got together. So again, these are fairly common things to have this stuff happen, but the longevity of them is really questionable and usually doesn't happen. Okay. There is no wing spreading for these birds. Aside from a nicely reworked version of Whiter Shade of Pale, all that manages to come across is a wall of sound not radically different from that churned out by half a dozen heavy metal groups. In fact, the album might be somewhat of an embarrassment to the artist later. Schon's guitar work lacks the spirit and fire of his work with Journey, and Shrieve shows none of the spark of Santana. Aaronson handles his work well, but only Hagar, a power screamer with few peers, matches the power of past works. And I think I said that thing that Ted Templeman had said. It's hard for him not to match the power just because he's just does. He's just Sammy Hagar. And he's just, if you like his voice, he's just always good. Just blessed that way. Okay, now the last one. The Daily Oklahoman. This is from April 15th, 1984. And again, as you're listening to these things, especially if you understand this music, if you've listened to this album before, does this ring true to you? What do you think about this? All right. Let's see here. This one's just called Rock. Oh, this is just a part of the album, the newspaper called Rock, etc. Hagar, Schon, Aaronson Shrieve, Shoot Through the Fire. They coined the term supergroup for packages like this. Sammy Hagar teams with Journey guitarist Neal Schon, ex-Santana drummer Michael Shrieve, and bassist Kenny Aaronson, formerly of Billy Squier and Rick Derringer's bands. And the results are stupendous rock and roll, right? Well, not quite. Some of the music on this live LP is as cliched as the well-worn Supergroup label. Hot and Dirty, for example, is a macho chest beater of a song typical of Hagar's least impressive solo works, full of overused catchphrases and familiar instrumental hooks. Now, that's what the last person said. That was the song they didn't really care for, and I have to agree with that idea. And Sammy Hagar, let's be honest, a great lyricist he is not. He's fine. He does okay, but he's not some spectacular lyricist. It is kind of the stuff that you get from Sammy. Let's see here. More trite arena rock is heard on trudging, mid-tempo mind grinders like Valley of the Kings, Giza, and He Will Understand. But there are some stunners here. Among the original tunes co-written by Hagar and Schon, the incendiary power of Missing You and Top of the Rock provide some genuine musical thrills. On the latter, vocalist Hagar takes his young audience to task with some refreshingly honest, no-holds-barred lines like, "You think it's tough being a kid? Well, try being a man sometime." I remember hearing that song and hearing that line, and I didn't know whether to think that was just silly or what. "You think it's tough being a kid? Well, try being a man sometime." I mean, I knew what he was trying to say, and of course I was 14 years old or whatever at the time. But even in my non-discerning 14-year-old brain, it sounded a little silly to me. I'm just telling you, that's how it came across when I heard that. And so anyway, while Schon wrenches and rakes his way through some brilliant electric guitar histrionics. Then there's the high drama and suspense of Animation, a strutting roundhouse puncher featuring one of Hagar's most powerful and convincing vocal performances to date, and Schon at his nimble-fingered best. And like I said, the Animation's not, I don't think it's a great song, but I do think it's interesting. And sometimes, I'll tell you, when I tell you that how I used to do these things, because I was buying so many records, I'd bring them home, I'd bring home a bag of records, and I just start shrink wrap, and I just start putting them on, going through and see. And it was often the ones that would be just weird, that would catch my attention enough that I'd actually listen to the whole thing. And that's probably why that song Animation even stands out to me at all, is because it was just kind of, when you look at the rest of the album, it was kind of an experimental, kind of an oddball thing. And it sounded good. The production was really good. And so it was something you could go, yeah, this is kind of, I don't know, it's not a great tune, but it's interesting enough that it keeps your attention, at least for a little bit. All right. Shrieve, whose credits also include Automatic Man and Novo Combo, is no slouch either, hammering out some inspired percussion on this tune and the locomotive My Hometown. And then there's a picture of the guys there in this newspaper, the Daily Oklahoman. So anyway, there's 3 reviews of this record, H.S.A.S, that came out just within a month or two, a few months after this record came out. And that's what people were saying about it at the time. Now, I know for me and my friends, as I said, I bought this thing immediately because I was so excited about this. I go into the record store, it was just barely on the shelf. This thing's at home with me, shrink wrap's coming off. And it was, but I want to show you one other thing about this. And to me, this speaks a little bit to what I would call lack of effort that was put into this. The recordings, again, are really, really good. They're clean. They're easy to hear. You know, the drum, I mean, all the tones are good. The album is produced well. But take a look at this. And this is oftentimes can be kind of a giveaway on a record. So they did have, you know, they put enough effort into it that they had an inner sleeve instead of just using the stock Geffen sleeve or some white sleeve. But just look at that for a second. That is, number one, a terrible picture to begin with. And number two, the way that it's cut out and thrown against that purple background, this is evidence of a rush, even careless job. Just when you look at how it's cut out, I mean, look at his hair right there. Just so little effort was put into this sleeve just by evidence of that photo right there. And this is what I mean. Sometimes that can be a giveaway on how much energy and effort is being put into something or how much seriousness is being put into something when something's so kind of not really good. And then look at this picture. I remember seeing this when I bought the album. And even again, as a 14-year-old kid with an undiscerning kind of cluelessness about this stuff, I thought, that is one of the worst photos I've ever seen from a concert ever. It was just, what is this? Again, and maybe, I'm sure, because it's usually the case, people watching these things will disagree with me. I looked at that and I thought, that is terrible. That's a terrible photo. Of all the pictures, of all the live pictures, you could not get a really cool shot of your band live than that? I mean, the microphone stand's blocking him and you can barely see. I mean, anyway, it's just not a great photo. And again, like I said, it's evidence to me that there was not really a lot of the care that you would put into something that you expected, that you wanted to have, that you really, really believed in. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And so, anyway, that was, like I said, I remember just as a kid seeing that stuff and thinking, this is kind of a sloppy effort. Now, the music, like I said, is produced really, really well. It sounds good. And the idea of it is really cool. And it's actually just, sometimes it's cool to have these things as even just a snapshot in time, you know, where you've got Neal Schon, who's on top of the world with his stuff. Sammy Hagar is just huge, wildly famous at this point. And then these other two who were, I mean, his work with Billy Squier, I was a huge Billy Squier fan, so I knew who he was. Michael Shrieve is the only one that at the time that I didn't have any idea who this guy was. And then we have this kind of cool little snapshot of hard rock back in the mid 80s and seeing these kind of cool guys. And we have the song Top of the Rock, at least for me, the one that still to this day, I'll bust that song out and think that is one powerful, awesome, cool piece of music. And so anyway, love to get your feedback on this stuff, what you thought of this album. In general, what were your favorite tracks on this? Did you have a similar experience to it as I did, or was yours different than mine? And also, can you relate to what the people that wrote these reviews had to say about it? They were all a little bit meh about this thing, you know, some more than others, but none of them were really wildly impressed with it, other than pointing out that it did have some high spots. Anyway, I'd love to get your feedback on that too. Please, if you're not following the channel, please follow the channel, like the video, and love again to hear all your comments about this. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.